All right, welcome. This is the Project Management and Leadership webinar presented by EWB-USA. This is part one of 2 sessions, and I am Brad Hughes. I'll be going through and talking about project management and leadership within EWB-USA. A little introduction of myself. I've been involved with the Madison area professional chapter for about 10 years. I've traveled on projects to Guatemala and to Haiti and been involved in numerous other projects over the years. And I currently work for Shive Hattery here in Madison, Wisconsin. I have a structural engineering background and have been working here in Madison for close to 20 years. Today's presentation is going to cover in a real broad strokes of the project management topic. We're going to start out by going through the purpose for this webinar, where it comes from, and then dig into the main topics that we're going to cover here today. I do have a couple of guests on with me. Megan and Carson. They may feel the need to ask some questions as we go along, and appreciate their help. Before we get started into the topic, I want to introduce a concept or an idea that I've seen used really effectively for team meetings or project meetings, is the idea of a parking lot. When you get into a big discussion or a meeting, you may find a topic that can possibly derail the discussion. It may be a really important topic to talk about, but it may not be on the agenda for your meeting. This is a way to keep track of those items without having it distract. Normally in this session where it would be interactive, we would potentially use that as something to keep track of items that we want to cover later. The purpose for this workshop is really to make us all, give us more ability to do more good within EWB. So we are trying to do as much good as we can with the time and manpower and resources that we have available. So in order to do that, you need to be as efficient as possible. Engineering projects have to be managed actively to make them successful and make them as efficient as you can. Ideally, this would allow us to do more of these projects and make them more successful. Like these on the lower right here, you see a bunch of very happy kids with water at a school in Guatemala. The other purpose for this really comes from the fact that project managers that are working in the professional world have, by the time they become a project manager, they have had a lot of experience at different roles and different portions of the project. So in order to do that, they have to go through the project process many times and understand what that project process is, the design process in particular, and have had numerous roles potentially within that design process. EWB student project managers come in to a project potentially without a lot of experience in how the project process goes. And so what I'm hoping here today is to kind of short circuit that a little bit and help a student project manager or a group leader or a task leader to help them be able to get themselves organized and work as efficiently as they can. Here's the topics that we're going to cover. The first part that we're going to cover here today is on team structure. And the first phase of the project would be simply the definition and development phase is what we're calling it. The next phase of the project process would be the planning phase. From that, you would develop a project management plan. That's going to be part one we're going to cover here. Part two will be another session to follow that will cover the rest of the topics here. This is a model that I was given by another mentor that I worked with here in Madison years ago. It's a project management model that sort of in graphical form takes all of the process that we go through and puts it in something that's hopefully a bit more understandable, and we're going to kind of step through this. So on the left, you see the definition phase. The top, you see the planning phase, and the bottom, you see the design and documentation phase. So we're going to work through each of these phases throughout this, and we'll look at the different pieces and parts of each of those phases as we go. So you'll see this on screen and kind of give you a roadmap to where we are in the process. So a pop quiz, something to think about as we go through here. What is the biggest expenditure on EWB projects? Many things to do and a lot of expenditures on our projects. So what's the biggest one? Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it a little bit later and we'll see if you can get it right. So the first part of in the planning phase, or one piece of the planning phase, is to organize your team. And organizational structure or charts are one way to do that, to try and, for your own internal purposes, so everyone is clear who is doing what. Is a real good way to keep track of that, but also it helps you understand your external stakeholders, could be your community members, the people that are making decision in the NGO, your EWB contacts, the mentors that are involved. Putting these charts together and can really help everybody understand, especially when you have new people come and join the project. So new students join the project or new mentors, by giving them this graphic that says, these are all the roles and these are the people that are in those roles and making those decisions. It really clarifies all those pieces for everybody involved. In addition to that, along with that would be just a directory of all the people involved and their contact information. So again, a new person comes in, it's very easily to give them this directory to say, here, these are all the people involved. If you need to contact Jane, here's her email. It really helps to facilitate the communication that a team needs and make sure that mentors, students, NGO contacts all can have the best communication possible. As you're organizing your teams, you really want to think about the personalities and the strengths of your team members. So if someone is really strong in one area, you want to put them in a position where they can do the most with that strength. You want to make everybody's experience really positive, and the best way to do that is to have everyone working toward their strengths, and also considering personalities. If there's a potential of conflict between people, obviously assign them roles that will avoid that conflict. So we're going to hear a lot about communication. Communication is such a huge part of a successful team, and a project manager is really a linchpin in that communication. So you have to consider all the different modes of communication that you have. Currently, the online and virtual communication is such a huge thing, and you have to figure out all the different other ways that you can communicate within that. Email, obviously, and text messaging, and your meetings and phone calls and all those sort of things kind of define the best ways to communicate for the different pieces and parts of the project. Meetings are obviously a really important form of communication that a manager or leader has with their team. Best way to make your meetings most successful is to have an agenda and make it clear to everybody the topics you're going to cover, and follow that up with notes, because undoubtedly you're going to have people that are not able to attend the meetings, and the best way for them to get the information they need is to go through the meeting notes. This also just makes it real clear for everybody, if you have to go back and look at a decision that was made, why was the decision made, or when was the decision made. Meeting notes are just a real good way to do that. And within that, tracking the actions that might need to come from it is a real important thing, and we'll talk a bit about that later on too. As far as communication of decision making is really an important critical part of any design project, and everybody involved should know who is making what decisions and who to to go to if they need a decision. So making that clear to everyone is really critical as well. So we're here in the first phase that we talked about, the definition development phase, where you have two parts that we're going to cover here are the project requirements and the statement of work. The project requirements are really just the story. You might think of it that way, the story of the project. And it's really just the facts and the parts of the project that you know at that time, and really a kind of a really big, broad brush, high level definition. And on Volunteer Village, there are a couple of under Project Manager tools. There are a couple of resources that you can use that they were referred to as requirements and assumptions. So these are documents that you want to have available to everyone, again, so that a new person or anyone within the team, if they want to understand the project, they can go through all this. So here's that project, the tools within Volunteer Village that would help you with that. So again, it's very high level requirements and assumptions. What it is, we're trying to build a water system in this community, and these are the pieces of information that we know or assumptions that we have at this point. So the statement of work is a bit more detail, also referred to as the scope, but it's a bit more detail on the project. So it's listing all the criteria that you need to work with. It's a real kind of the basic beginnings of the planning phase that you will go through. It lists what you know and what you don't know. There are going to be plenty of things that you don't know, and you need to understand and appreciate and be open to the fact that there are going to be parts that you are not yet even aware of, and parts that you don't have information on. So again, some Volunteer Village resources, scoping worksheets are out there based on the type of project. So a water project obviously is going to have a different set of information and outline than you're going to have from a bridge project. So some of those tools are out there online. So again, in the definition phase is to start to define all of the resources that you have. Obviously, as a student project manager, you have students available, and you have certain skills of students, and maybe you have some skills that or resources that you don't have. This is the place to start to identify them. Look at the mentors that you have. Do you have the right mentors that you need for the type of project that you have? You have a mentor with electrical background, but you're doing a bridge project. Obviously, you need to fill in some of the gaps. Other resources that you have are the design standards for the type of project that you have, whether they're available like international design standards or whether they're US design standards. Examples are a great resource. Project examples are available out there on Volunteer Village and elsewhere, and those are a really good resource. So starting to pull all of those together. And then obviously in your own university and within EWB, there are resources of staff that you need to kind of start to assemble and make sure everybody is clear who those resources are. So now we move into the planning phase. Again, here in the chart at the top, the planning phase is a number of different components, and we'll kind of walk through those. So why plan? What's important about planning, and why is it done? It's really done in large part for efficiency, but also you have to at some point commit to a schedule, you have to commit to a project cost, and you have to figure out how to manage yourself and your team and all the resources that you have to make that project successful. So in order to do that, you have to have the plan together. And once you have that plan together, then you can manage from that plan. Another reason to plan is just to reduce the risks that are involved in the project and the unknowns. So going from left to right in these pie charts, the pie being the whole project at the beginning, you're going to have a certain amount of information that you know. There's going to be a certain amount of information that is unknown or risks in red here at the beginning of the project. And then there's information that you need, and that's in blue. And as you go from left to right, hopefully that information that you still need is going to reduce, and the unknowns and the risks are also going to reduce. And so as you get through to the end of the project, your knowns and defined information increases to where you have a small amount of risk. You're trying to minimize, by the time the project is ready for construction, you're trying to minimize the unknowns and the risks that you have. And the most manageable way to go through and plan a project is to break it down into smaller components. So starting the front end of a bridge design project, sometimes it's really hard to get your head around the whole project. We have a pedestrian bridge to design. It's a lot of parts that go into that. So you can break it down into manageable pieces like the foundation. You can assign people to that and break it down into another piece is going to be the superstructure, for instance. And by breaking it down into smaller components, it's easier for individual team members and everyone to understand. Okay, going back to the pop quiz that we had earlier. Carson, Megan, any chance you want to throw your answer in here? Biggest expenditure on EWB projects?
I was thinking capital costs, like construction materials.
Okay, good, yeah. It's a good guess.
Yeah, I was thinking either materials themselves or transportation of the materials.
Very good. That's when it comes to the actual construction, yeah, that could be potentially yes, but overall, depending on how you value your time, the time of all the students, the time of the mentors, the time of the community involved in all this is really going to be, again, depending on how you value your time, is going to be the biggest expenditure, especially on these international projects where it may be that the materials are from a real dollar cost. The materials in country are going to be the biggest part of it, but depending on how you value that time, in the real out in the real world, our time is valued and is really where all the expense comes from. So another way to think about it. So we've been talking about planning. And one thing I want to try and differentiate is between planning and scheduling. So you can go through and plan a project, figure out all of the pieces and parts and how you're going to get from A to B and where you're going to need it, what you're going to need to build this project, and who is going to do the work to do it. And you can do all of that without a schedule, whether that takes 6 months or it takes 2 years, you can put all the parts together. Once you start putting time to it, then it becomes a schedule. And once you have applied a schedule to it, then suddenly you start to realize how many people you might need and the resources that you need to meet that schedule. Well, a lot of pieces, when you have a project with a lot of pieces, again, trying to break things down into smaller tasks is an important part of that. And what we're going to refer to that here is the work breakdown structure, which is a common term for that idea of breaking the project down into smaller tasks. You need to choose your technology, and tools is one part of that also, technology from a computer technology or in-country technology and all of that. But you also need to start estimating your resources during that planning phase. And you're doing that in order to estimate the project budget and schedule that you're going to need. So we'll go into more detail here on the work breakdown structure in a bit. So the project management plan is really kind of when you bundle all of this information that we're talking about here today. The project management plan is that bundle. So again, you look at this process of this model that we're talking about here. If you put that all in one form, in one book, for instance, that would be that project management model. So this is something that you can share with your team or share again with new people And it is another tool to communicate, this is the project that we're working on, and this is how we're going to complete that project. So that project management plan includes these pieces that we're talking about here today. And that is really, a real key item for a project manager to organize and pull together, again, mostly if a project needs to be handed off to another team or someone new joins the team. It's a real good tool to have that plan together. The work breakdown structure is a big piece of that. So again, this is when you take a project, start to break it down into pieces. It makes it easier to manage for individuals responsible for those pieces. And there's a lot of ways that you can break projects down. I meant note here that you can be divided up by the type of work or the level of detail or the responsibility. But there's some natural ways that within EWB that the work breakdown structure happens. So these are just some typical ones that I've seen. The way projects get broken up by the responsibility of subgroups. So you have a team of students that are working on the design, and that design piece might be further broken down, but you have another team that's working on fundraising and another team on logistics. You have the project managers that are kind of a separate subgroup themselves. Of course, the design, on a typical EWB project, that design effort is going to require much more detail than some of the other ones, because you may have, like I mentioned earlier, your bridge project, you may have a design, a team that's working on just the foundation. You may have another team that's working on the superstructure. So the design effort will usually take greater effort to break that down. So again, you're taking all the different portions of the project, breaking it up into smaller pieces. And this is a tool that I have used and we have used here in Madison called the card trick, where once you have broken the project down into smaller pieces, then you put those tasks and design responsibilities up on a wall and apply them to a timeline. And from that, you then develop a work plan that you can follow. So some other examples that you have here for where each column in this case is a week, and you have these individual tasks that are needed to be completed, and you assign them to a person or a team that's responsible for it, and they're given a, that needs to be completed by this date, and you put that on your timeline here, left to right. And so just kind of some more detail. In this case, it was really assigning tasks by color. So a particular team, was assigned the red colored tasks. A different team was doing the blue colored tasks, and they needed to talk to each other accordingly. So again, you can develop and go through this planning process based on your project, but it can be for different portions of the project as well. You could have a process that you organize and plan out like this, that is to assemble your application to acquire a new project. That is a whole, could potentially be a whole new project. If you're headed for putting an alternative analysis together, you can organize that as put a plan together to assemble that alternatives analysis and break the project down within that. So there's, typically there's an overall design process that you're going to go through for depending on the phase of the project you're in, and you can apply these principles to each of those phases. So that's the end of part one for project management and leadership. Anyone out there right now, Carson, Megan, do you guys have any questions on that part one so far?
I do have a question, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So you showed a picture earlier, I think it was in the planning section, and you had the different pie charts of information that you know versus what you don't know and versus what you need to know. Mm-hmm. My question is, what's the difference between information that is unknown and information that you need to know?
So I guess how I would explain that is if you have a certain certain type of information, like the amount of water that a community needs, you know you're going to need that information. You just don't know what it is. An unknown might be things that you haven't even really aren't even aware of yet, or haven't even come to understand something coming from that community, or some outside influence that may affect the project that you aren't even aware of yet. So, in that pie chart, it was a bit, of a, kind of a concept that it's information that you might not even know is going to affect the project at some point. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Relating to that, with your experience, what level of concern does stuff that you don't know you need to know cause?
I think you just have to appreciate it and know that you just know that there are things that are going to happen, that are going to come down the line in the course of the project that are going to just throw a wrench in the works. And you just need to be get yourself prepared for that. If you have a solid plan in place, that'll allow you to, be flexible and work through that. If you don't have a plan in place, it's going to be much harder to kind of deal with those things. But I mean, it's just the inevitable way that a design process goes. In any project, every project I've had has had major, at some point there's some, major issue that comes out of a meeting, or a client or an owner or a community can, have something come up, and you just have to be ready and accepting that you're going to find a way to deal with it. All right, good questions. That's the end of part one. We'll look for part two afterwards. If you need some questions for me, feel free to reach out. Here's a good reference, just going to refer you to. It's the Field Guide to Environmental Engineering for Development Workers. It's a great reference. It's very commonly used amongst EWB projects, and I encourage you to get that for your library.